evening, everyone. My name is Roberto Veloso, and I'm the chair of the Anne Arundel County Human Relations Commission. For members of the general public watching our meeting for the first time, the Human Relations Commission is a part of the Anne Arundel County government. It was created for the purpose of promoting and enhancing the ability of all Anne Arundel County residents to pursue their lives free of discrimination. To accomplish this goal, the Human Relations Commission has been charged with a legislative mandate to enforce Anne Arundel County's fair housing law and work towards the elimination of discrimination in the county. If you believe you have been a victim of discrimination in housing or wish to bring some other matter relating to discrimination in Anne Arundel County to the Commission's attention, please contact us using the contact information on the Human Relations Commission webpage on the Anne Arundel County government website. The Commission is meeting today pursuant to Section 3-5A-106 of the Anne Arundel County Code for the purpose of conducting business required to perform its statutory mandated duties. It is now 6:01 p.m. and the meeting of the Anne Arundel County Human Relations Commission will come to order. Tonight, our agenda is devoted to a special presentation by and a question and answer session with the newly appointed Anne Arundel County Chief of Police, Amal Awad. Forgive me, Chief. Forgive me. I'm not good with names. And her executive staff. So in lieu of a formal roll call, let me introduce everyone in our Zoom meeting tonight so the Chief knows who's on the call. And we'll just do that real quickly here. Commissioner Clapsaddle, could you please identify yourself?
Good evening.
Very good. Commissioner Peterson?
Good evening.
Very good. Commissioner Hatcher?
Good evening, everyone.
Thanks for joining us. And that, I believe, is all that we have on the call right now from the commission. We have a couple of excused absences, and we are expecting a couple of other commissioners to join our call shortly. Let me also introduce the Interim Human Relations Officer, Joella Ridgway, who's here on the call. Chief, if I'm going to turn the introductions over to you. You've got a couple of your executive staff here. So if you could just briefly just have them identify themselves for the record and so that we all know who's here.
Sure, I'll help facilitate that. Deputy Chief Gerard Flemings, if you will. You're on mute, sir. You're still on mute, sir.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll help him out here. He's on mute. So
okay.
He's saying that he is I have two deputy chiefs.
Okay.
Here he is. He's live now. Okay, we got you. We can hear you now, sir.
I apologize. I thought I unmuted. Sorry about that. Deputy Chief Gerard Flemings. I have the, as the chief was saying, there's two deputy chiefs. I have the operations side, which is most of the officers that you see on the street, the detectives, etc. The other deputy chief has the admin, like the training academy and personnel staff, that type of thing. Thank you.
Yes, and that deputy chief is Deputy Chief William Lowry, who could not be with us tonight. However, Major Simpson is here, and she is a direct report to Deputy Chief Lowry on the administration side of our department. If you will, Major Simpson, introduce yourself.
Good evening, I'm Major Michelle Simpson. As the chief indicated, I'm the major for the Bureau of Administration. We have mostly the civilian staff for the police department. We do have the training academy and the police personnel section, which handles all of our recruitment and hiring for the police department.
Thank you, Major Simpson. And I did flip to the other side of our department. We'll go back to operations and introduce you to the very well-known, everyone knows her when they see her, Major Katie Goodwin, who oversees our Bureau of Patrol.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all again.
And then we have Major Passman, who oversees our Bureau of Operations and Investigations. And you're on mute, sir. And he's still on mute. but it's okay. We'll figure it out. We'll work it out.
Okay,
How about now?
there we go. We can hear you now.
Sorry, I'm on my phone. My computer did not work today. So I have our Criminal Investigations Division and our Special Operations Division underneath me. But good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. I just want to note real quick, we also have Megan Brown on the call today, who is our newly appointed head of Boards and Commissions Coordinator. Hi, Megan. Thanks for joining us. And we also have Christy Alvarez, who is an administrative assistant from the County Executive's Office, here to make sure that everything goes right with our Zoom meeting here tonight. But with that, Chief, thank you again for joining us. I know we've been trying to get together for a while now. We've been wanting to have this conversation with you. We thought it was important to have a dialogue with you, given that we frequently hear from the community whenever there's an incident or a situation involving the police. And we obviously we don't have any kind of oversight responsibility involving the police department, but we're here as an independent body that's been appointed by the county executive and the county council. And one of the things that we do is make recommendations that we think should be made. And we're frequently a participant in these conversations involving human relations and other civil rights issues. So that's why we're here. That's why we asked you here, and very grateful to have you, and very excited to hear about your plans for the department. And we're very happy that you're here. Let me go ahead and just turn over the floor to you. What I thought we would do is give you an opportunity to go ahead and share any information that you would be interested in sharing with us, and then we could have a question and answer session. As you know, we've last summer, after the George Floyd murder and the subsequent Black Lives Matter protest, the commission met in response to hearing an outcry from the community. And one of the things that we did is we made a request of the police department that they implement various changes. Some of them have been made to a certain degree, and just want to try to continue this dialogue to the degree that we can, to see how we can continue to move forward in terms of improving the relationship between the police department and the community, increasing trust, and increasing accountability of the department, civilian accountability. And so I'll just turn over the floor to you. Then after you have a chance to tell us what you'd like to tell us, we'll go ahead and have some question and answer, if that's okay.
Awesome. Thank you for inviting us to be here. I am going to provide a bit of an overview for you. So just bear with me. Today is actually my 35th day in service to you as your new chief of police. I'm still very much excited to be here. As you may or may not know, I retired from the Prince George's County Police Department after serving 23 years with them. I also served here shortly thereafter as the chief of staff to former police chief Kevin Davis. And most recently, I served as the chief of police for the city of Hyattsville for the last 2 years. Community policing is something that means a lot to me. It's at the core for me as to who I am as a police officer. Early on in my career, I had the opportunity to actually be a cops officer while I was working in Hyattsville for the Prince George's County Police Department. So it was there that I was able to really grasp how meaningful community policing is, not only for the department, but the community at large, in terms of building relationships, valuing those relationships, and fostering those relationships. I'm passionate about people, but I'm also passionate about this profession and service, as most or the vast majority of the police officers I know. And we truly care about helping people, making a difference in their lives. So you've already met the command staff. I just wanted to touch on a couple focal points about the Anne Arundel County Police Department as the new person, and just coming in and looking at things from an outside perspective. I know that in terms of a professional organization, this department is highly respected amongst its peers and the community at large from our surrounding jurisdictions. We get tapped for training assistance on a regular basis, and I'll get into that, or some of that, a little later. But it's important to note that since 1994, our department has been internationally accredited by the Commission on Accreditation for law enforcement agencies. Some of you may know it as CALEA. Um, that requires adopting several hundred professional standards and adhering to them. Um, and then we undergo both on-site and remote site inspections, the on-site being every 4 years and then every year on the remote site inspection. So that is an outside entity that makes sure that we are adhering to these professional standards that many progressive law enforcement agencies throughout the country subscribe to. Not every department is CALEA accredited, so we're very proud of not only being accredited, but for so long, being ahead of that. Also, this department, as you all well know, we've adopted the recommendations from the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing to include the 6 pillars. And I highlight the 6 pillars quite frequently. And essentially, the 6 pillars provide a guide for all police departments throughout the country to develop their very robust community policing programming. The first pillar being building trust and legitimacy. And I'll just go through each pillar just relatively quickly, but begins with community engagement and fostering one relationship at a time. We within our department have several programs, and we've been fortunate with very talented staff, creative staff. They come to us with ideas, and we evaluate programs and we ask them to move the ball forward with executing these programs. One of which, you all may know her very well, Miss Tamika Perkins. Just recently launched a Minority Youth Advisory Council, very diverse group of young people. I had the opportunity to meet with them just last month. Their role, they're in learning phase or mode right now, but they will be collaborating with us on community projects together. Although COVID-19 has kind of restricted the way we do things in terms of community engagement outside of these, virtual forums, we're looking forward to returning to some semblance of normalcy so we can get back to that, in-person contact. But I know that they're having various conversations and discussions. Particularly tonight, they are meeting, and the focus is on just what we're talking about, the recommendations from the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. Also, I know that she's probably presented Project Fresh Start to you. Unfortunately, we're not able to launch that within the school system just yet, but we're going to continue to work with the school system so that we can get to a full launch. But in the interim, we've launched a pilot out of our Eastern District. It's a pre-arrest diversion program decriminalizing behaviors and holding youth accountable amongst their peers. The intent is to reduce the racial and ethnic disparities in charging young people with crimes and providing early intervention services to youth impacted by trauma, mental health, or substance abuse. We're also working on, I neglected a very important piece. In the midst of COVID, our youth activities program is still very active. They have 26 events on the schedule between April and October. And I'm just highlighting just a few of the events: golfing with a cop, basketball and baseball camps, and crab sailing. They're very creative and thinking outside of what we typically see within other police departments. And I know we all appreciate that, particularly the youth engagement. That's important. On the adult side of the house, Mr. Derek Matthews is in the research and evaluation phase on a reentry program. We're in discussion right now with the City of Annapolis Police Department on this collaboration. He'll be shadowing here very shortly, APD for a week to get a clearer perspective on their programming. And we know that, they've experienced some success with their partnership with VOTEC, the Vocational Training Center in Baltimore, providing training and support services for returning citizens and veterans. And some of the programming involves, automotive repair, CDL licensing, culinary arts, just various trades to help folks get back on their feet, because we know once they leave the system, it's challenging to find a job. So it's good to have programs like this in place for the good of the community so that they're able to thrive and provide for their families as well. Um, the second pillar of 21st century policing is policy and oversight. So right now we're in the process of reviewing our policies to not only make sure that they are current or contemporary, but also based on best practices. And again, CALIA holds us accountable to the professional standards. So our policies have to be consistent with not just the law, but the standards that they set and have in place for us. But just some of the policies we'll be looking at, and we're going to be looking at roughly 20. Um, our mission statement, I've talked about revising it. It's short. It should be something we all believe in, and it should also contain elements, of sanctity of life. But again, it should be something we believe from our hearts and not just words on a page. Community relations, bias-free policing, our internal affairs process, from what I understand, has been revised. The reporting process to better serve complainants and our citizens. Immigration status, that's an important subject. We just want to make sure we're current. As you know, we don't ask the question to a person's immigration status, and nor do we enforce any civil detainers by ICE. We're evaluating our duty to intervene policy. We actually just developed it, and we've also partnered with another organization, and I'll get into that here shortly, but also our hate bias incidents. But again, these are just a few of roughly 20 that we'll be evaluating over the next couple of weeks. I know that the question of citizens review boards has come up quite frequently. And, I have expressed that I am in support of a citizens review board based on best practices. And I know we've researched, the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, NACO, to look to those best practices. But I also understand we've put that on pause for now. As you all well know, there are many bills being presented before the House and the Senate, and those bills are going to have an impact on how we move forward. So it just makes sense for right now to pause. Not that we don't want to be decisive on our own accord, but we want to make sure that we're within whatever the state law, creates. And another subject that we can't not discuss is the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. We know that that there are several bills being proposed with regard to repealing it, and that's okay. We understand, but we also want to make sure we replace it with something that still provides for some sort of due process, but also restores authority to the chief of police in making decisions on disciplinary matters. The third tenet of 21st century policing is technology and social media. As you all well know, we are in the development phase of the body-worn camera project. Mr. Pittman committed $18 million to design and implement this program. We're developing the policy and preparing for community engagement phase. Axon is a product that we've selected. It has many features that will be beneficial to us. Whenever our officers either get out of the car, the system is going to activate, or if we come in close proximity with one another, the system will activate. And it's to protect us, to protect all of us, community officers, and provide us with as accurate a depiction of how situations unfold. So right now we're on schedule to have 100 officers deploy those cameras by mid-July, and then by late August, all Anne Arundel County police officers, to include me, will be issued a body camera. Social media, we're using social media platforms right now to engage our residents. Obviously, our reach is greater on social media. We're going to change the way we communicate, what we do. We do a lot of good work here, and we don't necessarily share our story. So you're going to see that come out. We get questions from community, and many of those questions that are asked are as simple as, you can find that either information on the website, or we should be getting that information out to the community. So we're going to do a better job of just that. Um, the Probably one of the most important pieces beyond the first tenet of 21st century policing is the fourth one, community policing and crime reduction. Obviously, again, COVID-19 has affected the way we engage one another, but we'll continue our partnerships with the community. We'll continue to seek ways to engage one another. Our officers continue to assist with food distribution events, and they're present at the COVID-19 testing sites. Um, when we look at crime, it's down compared to this time last year, but we've also seen an increase in calls for service for our crisis intervention team. Those calls are increasing. Just this week, we had at least 4 suicides or attempted suicides. We find that very concerning. We know that COVID-19 has had negative impacts on folks in the midst of it, and we're also anticipating for probably more coming out of COVID-19. So our focus will also shift on increasing our resources within our crisis intervention team. You probably know that the County Executive's Office, Dr. K, is working with Johns Hopkins on creating a community survey. We're looking forward to that so we can get a feel for what our community is pleased with, what they feel we could do better. It's always nice to have feedback so we can kind of gauge where we are and where we need to be. I've proposed the creation of a community services bureau to increase our investment in community engagement. We have a patrol bureau, we have an operations and investigations bureau, and they do their jobs very well. But what I think would help complement those pieces is a community engagement bureau. So I'm looking forward to enhancing that for our department. I'm just gonna one more time tout that we're a regional leader when it comes to crisis intervention and crisis response. Again, I've encouraged and proposed expanding this program, but we're constantly asked of other agencies to come in and help provide guidance on how to stand up, their own crisis intervention team. So it's something that Anne Arundel County has been ahead of for many, many years. The fifth pillar, and we're almost at number 6, so you can breathe a sigh of relief, training and education. Right now, we're completing the application process with Georgetown Law on a training called ABLE, which stands for Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement. If you're not familiar with it, it's a research-based peer intervention program. It's designed to prevent misconduct and mistakes, mitigating harm to the community and our officers. And our ultimate goal is to promote a culture where officers routinely intervene, not necessarily in situations where there's a use of force, but in situations where an officer may see an officer deviate from policy, and you're tapping that person on the shoulder saying, hold on a minute, you really shouldn't be doing that. So we see that as a positive, and it will also help us in continuing to foster our relationship and trust with the community. I just want to let everyone know I've spent a good amount of time on Zooms meeting community members, and I've also visited our district stations. Sometimes I've not been able to be present as I'd like. For our officers, I think it's important for them to meet me also, to see me and be able to engage with me. But I've begun the conversation. Our command staff has begun the conversation with them about incorporating conversations on the matters of race, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Those conversations are conversations that some folks tend to shy away from. And it is not exclusive to just our profession. People are uncomfortable talking about those subjects. So right now, I've asked Major Simpson to reach out to Dr. Chris Marsh at the University of Maryland to help us facilitate those conversations. I like to tout the fact that we are one of only 3 police departments that I'm aware of within the state of Maryland that's partnered with 2 very special professors, Dr. Sharita Jacobs Thompson and Dr. Bernard Demzik. Um, they run a program out of the national, they're not affiliated with the museum, but they have an agreement with the museum to train police officers. And so we explore American policing in the African American community, and there's a historical perspective from the transatlantic slave trade to contemporary policing. You have a conversation and also, excuse me, a guided tour of the museum, and it's rather enlightening. I've been twice so far, but I've been through with my previous agency, Hyattsville, and the feedback I've received thus far from our officers has been that it was an enlightening experience, and there were things that they hadn't learned in school or in our history books that they were made aware of, not just on the tour, but through the discussion phase of the that program. So that's certainly something we'll be continuing once we're able to do that safely in the midst of this COVID-19. And then finally, one of the most important, in my humble opinion, um, pillars is the 6th pillar, and that's officer safety and wellness. Um, Anne Arundel County has a long-standing peer support group, and it's important for officers to have someone to talk to. Sometimes officers aren't so willing to talk about what they see, what they experience. They tend to internalize it. And we know, now that really that's not a healthy thing to do, and that we should encourage them to talk. We can't compel them to, but we do encourage them to talk because they see things the average person does not see on a daily basis. And they're helping people, in the midst of crises. Everything's not always positive. Those contacts aren't always positive. So it's important for us to make sure that they have the resources they need. And I've said this before, I believe, that the way we treat one another internally, showing them, that we value them, oftentimes is reflective of the way our officers then go out into the community and engage with community members. So it's important for us to continue to support them and make sure they have not just the physical equipment and resources they need, but the human side, the human resources, readily available to them. And it's incumbent upon all of us to ensure they have the training and resources so that they're able to navigate through some of these very traumatic experiences. And again, just one last tout on our crisis intervention team. Most recently, they've been traveling to Washington, D.C. to help the members of the United States Capitol Police Department in the aftermath of that devastating and deadly insurrection on the United States Capitol on February 6th. So they reached out to us because not many departments have what we have here in Anne Arundel County. And I just think it's important that we highlight a lot of what we do, a lot of what we do well. We're not perfect, but we're certainly willing to constantly assess ourselves, reevaluate, and look at what we can do better. And with that, I thank you for allowing me to provide a little bit of an overview on myself, our command staff, and our department. So we're ready for any questions that you have.
Great. Thank you so much, Chief. Before we get started with Q&A, I just want to note that we had one other commissioner join us, Commissioner Mary Dudoni, who is on our Zoom meeting here today. But with that, let's go ahead and just open up the floor to commissioners with respect to any questions they might have regarding the Chief's presentation and any other questions regarding policing and our role in the community as a commission working with police, trying to make the county the best place for all. And if you all are being shy, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. Sorry, I'm not showing myself. I'm having a bad hair day. But I do have a question, Chief. I wanted to see what your view was on community policing. I remember growing up in the streets of North New Jersey, and there were officers that we were pretty familiar with. That I guess that was their patrol, but they knew the neighbors. We knew who they were, and it really did set a tone as to who was, our neighborhood policeman or woman. So I kind of wanted to get your view on that. I see that now a lot of districts or communities have police officers that are not of that neighborhood. Um, and so just wanted to get your view on that. Thank you.
So again, having come up as a community police officer, I do value community policing. Um, I know that at each of our districts, we do have what we call packed officers, police and community together. But it's certainly a program, and I spoke to it just a little while ago, that I'd like to make a little more robust. But right now, the higher priority coming in the midst of COVID and coming out of it will be investing in our crisis response, our crisis intervention team, simply because we see the real need. But certainly, the next investment or the next ask on my behalf will be to increase our staffing so that I'm able to bring more community officers onto the department and into the community. Again, I see the value in it, having been a police officer, a community officer specifically.
Thank you.
I see we've got Commissioner Peterson, Dodoni, and Clapsaddle with their hands up. So let's go ahead. Why don't we start with Commissioner Peterson?
Thank you, Chairman Veloso. Chief, good to see you again. I was interested in that Baltimore County, even though they have policies somewhat like ours, felt it necessary to enact legislation to ban chokeholds, to increase the de-escalation efforts, and a number of other things. And I was wondering, are you confident enough in how we teach police to do things? I'm always concerned when I see in the policies that we have that it says, we ban chokeholds unless there's imminent danger. And then I get flashbacks to Eric Gardner in New York, what happened to him. And of course, everybody knows what happened to George Floyd. So, how do you get officers to understand what that imminent danger means? And why don't we just ban those kind of efforts entirely? Because I don't think they're necessary and I don't think they're useful in terms of community policing.
I agree. I'm not a fan of chokeholds. And yes, we have written within our use of force policy banning of chokeholds, neck restraints, etc. The thing about training is we're unlearning the training that we've received over X amount of years. But to my knowledge, and please correct me, command staff, that is not a practice that we do train on. I know currently that's not a practice that we train on. I'm just speaking, from the past, but enough of the time if and when you see officers using those techniques, and enough of the time, because this is all new for everyone, it may require retraining. We have to look at the intent behind the person and whether or not, it was reflexive for them in these dynamic situations. It becomes a little challenging, and sometimes it may take reinforcing training to get our officers or an officer where we expect them to be. But yes, currently within our policy, specifically the use of force policy, there is the prohibition of chokeholds unless there's a life-threatening incident where you have to use defend your life.
Right. And similar, one other issue was shooting at moving vehicles. Um, it says in the policy, I believe, that if there's not a passenger in it and your life is threatened, it may be warranted to do that. But that sounds like the wild, wild west in some ways. So how does that factor in? I don't ever can see. We can call in other officers in terms of the situation and patrol cars, why would we ever need to be shooting unless, I mean, maybe they're shooting at you, but why would we be shooting at a moving vehicle?
I think the way our policy is written is that unless the vehicle is being used as a weapon against you, we're prohibited from shooting at moving vehicles. And correct me, command staff, if I'm wrong, but I do believe that's the way our policy um, does read, that unless that
Okay.
vehicle is weaponized and used against you, and in the interest of time, you have no other option. That's the only
Gotcha.
recourse for an officer. Thank
Commissioner
you,
Udo-
Mr. Peterson.
Commissioner Udoni, you're on mute. You're still on mute. There we go.
Hello, Chief Owen.
Hello.
It's nice to see you in person.
You
Are
as
you
well.
getting an echo from me?
No, ma'am.
Okay, I'm the only one getting the echo. I'll be seeing you again in a couple of weeks at the NAACP meeting.
Okay.
And I've seen you before at various presentations and forums. I want to start by praising and thanking your reference to the 6 pillars of the 21st century policing.
Thank you.
We really appreciate that. And I want to raise some issues that I think are going to be ongoing points of conversation. In fact,
Okay.
one of them is going to an ongoing conversation on what Commissioner Peterson just said. Here's some big topics that we're going to all be dropping into. We've already dropped into. They're bigger than Anne Arundel County, but they impact Anne Arundel County. Bill on SROs, banning SROs. We're going to be taking this up at the county level in discussion among advocate groups. I don't know how that will come into the HRC, but the conversation's out there. I'd like to hear you talk about that. And in particular, if the state enacts a ban on the SROs, what might that do to feeding into the diversion programs under Major Goodwin and Tamika Perkins? And
So
I'll stop there.
I should really have Tamika on this call to really talk about that because she is most passionate about this. In fact, we have a meeting scheduled tomorrow to talk about this. I support the SRO program. I've seen it work. I've seen the benefits. The state obviously set a law in place to safeguard our children while they are in school. And I do know that on a professional development note, the extensive training that our officers receive in terms of serving as school resource officers, serving in the capacity as a mentor, serving in the capacity as an unofficial, counselor. Kids gravitate towards cops. That we pique their interest, and we're approachable. I know that, or I've heard from our staff, the unique officers who serve currently as SROs, that unique group of people. It takes a special person to insert themselves, in an environment with kids. You have to be patient. You have to understand that kids are kids and they do things that young people do, and that their brains aren't fully developed. They're not adults, and you don't engage them as adults. You don't necessarily meet them where they are, but you try to help develop them to bring them along to where they, what might be a better decision or a better outcome for them in the school environment. Do I think we should be enforcing, disciplinary matters that are specific to the school? No, no. I think that we serve our purpose there to make sure that the children are safe in a learning environment, and that we are there to ensure that criminal elements don't make their way into the school. I can speak to my experiences, at another high school in another county, and just being fully aware of, the gang activity, and being fully aware that young folks come to schools to pick fights, and they're armed, and they're not just armed with sticks, they're armed with serious weapons. And to have that officer right there makes the difference. I know that children tend to mitigate, after school fights or even fights in school because enough of the time they get ahead of it by reporting it to the SRO who's right there on the campus with them versus, having to wait for an officer to clear a call to respond to the school. By the time, that happens, the assault or whatever incident has already occurred. So, I support the school resource officer program.
I appreciate that answer. Uh, the clarity with which you support it, and you've given me another dimension to what is clearly a multidimensional, complex picture. Um, the conversation is going to go on in the county. I know the school system is taking their part of and changing their policies around the SROs are involved. So I came to you with this question based on two perspectives: safety uh, of the students within the school. And the idea is out there that the SROs could be stationed outside the building. And then what's the impact of having the SROs inside the building, positive and negative? And even on the negatives, there are positives. The positive are the relations you spoke about. The negative is that extraordinary number of citations. And the positive aspect of the citations is that they get diverted into Tamika's programs.
There you go.
It's a complex picture.
There you go.
You're going to want me to shut up really soon. Do you want to say anything about the efforts at the bill at the state level to remove the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights?
So I've not.
And the reason for that. You can tie it to civilian review boards if you wish.
I've not been a supporter of repealing a complete repeal of the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights because it does provide due process to our officers. The vast majority of officers get up every day, put this uniform on, come to work to do good and to perform goodwill in the community. A very small margin of officers, don't do that. And so it's incumbent upon police chiefs to allow the process so that we make the decision and the responsibility falls on us as police chiefs to administer appropriate disciplinary action once they go through an administrative hearing board process. What I do believe needs to change is the fact that we've allowed over the years LEOBR to change, inviting collective bargaining agreements into the process and removing the authority from the chief executive officer of the department, the police chief, who has to answer to the community, about his or her officers. I do believe that the authority should be restored to all police chiefs as LEOBR was intended throughout the state of Maryland. Some people confuse that, and I think people are a lot more clear now, but I know initially I was hearing, officers aren't held accountable when they commit a crime. Well, yes, they are. We're not treated any differently than the average person if we commit a crime. We are susceptible to being criminally charged as well when we commit a crime. The LEOBR is an administrative process that affords the police officer certain rights, which any employee is entitled to within their respective, profession. So it's not necessarily something, that I've agreed with in terms of a complete repeal. I do support the some proposed amendments, and I made those points. Restoring the authority as it was intended to the chief of police to make decisions about discipline, whether it's through retraining, corrective action, disciplinary action, or complete separation from the agency.
I'm going to speak
Commissioner
more from my
Didoni,
naivety than
Commissioner
anything else.
Didoni, there's a couple of other commissioners that have questions. So could we come back to you after we have given some others a chance? Commissioner Clapsaddle.
Chief and officers, it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm a fairly new resident of Anne Arundel County, so I'll speak from that perspective. And I come from California, which, as you know, is rampant. A couple of pieces of good news that I heard from you this evening, I want to make certain I understood them correctly, was one, that we will have cameras for all officers by the end of the summer. Because
Yes, sir.
that will help a lot in what Mary is referring to, and you know, it will help us, and it's important. And I think the other thing is that, do you have, I'm curious to know what you would do if you were writing this law enforcement officer's Bill of Rights. What would you do from your perspective? Because I agree that there has to be a method, but I also want to have transparency. And quite frankly, I'm prejudiced because I know that for instance, I was very involved. I was on the Citizens Advisory in California with the Sheriff's Department. And there was a lot of issues with that about protection of the officers when they were not acting in accordance with the way that we wanted them to act as a community. So that's an issue with me. And the other thing is that I am in favor of a community review board. So I'll be quiet. I just had one question for you. Okay. Oh, and the other thing is I've had a really good experience with the Anne Arundel County Police Department. You know, I don't always come to a full and complete stop in my neighborhood, and they're right there to remind me that I should do that. And they do it in the nicest way.
I mean, that speaks volumes. You just spoke to a personal experience and not just one. I'm sure it's been, you know, several contacts. I'm proud to lead this agency. I'm proud to be its newest, you know, member. Again, I spoke to, you know, how well respected this department is within this region. We have a very good reputation, and it isn't just about reputation, it's about delivering. The proof is in the pudding. The service that our agency delivers is exemplary. It is, quite frankly. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. But processes are in place to include LEOBR to hold officers accountable. Again, LEOBR is an administrative procedure, not a criminal procedure. If an officer is alleged to have committed a crime and probable cause exists, that officer gets arrested just like the average citizen. The Administrative Hearing Board process, or the LEOBR, provides for an Administrative Hearing Board process where, you know, officers, a ranking officer is chairing a three-member panel, and they're hearing the facts of the case, and they make a decision. There's a prosecutorial aspect and a defense aspect, and they make a decision based on the evidence and the facts presented as to whether or not an officer is guilty or not guilty of a, you know, an administrative violation. And then they make a recommendation to the chief of police, who has the authority to either receive that recommendation, they can reduce the disciplinary recommendation, or increase it. So again, there are some jurisdictions within the state of Maryland who have given away that authority of the chief of police. And I think that needs to be restored so that you, the community, holds me accountable as LEOBR was intended.
So I'm sorry, I got one more thing here.
You're on mute. Joe, you're on mute. There you go. Nope, still can't hear you. There you go.
Oh, I do believe that there has to be a mutual sense of trust, and that's built up over time. And I think this community review board would be important. I certainly don't have an argument with the decision administratively to come to the chief, because you are responsible for your department from the very bottom to the top. I think the community would feel a lot more comfortable if there was transparency, and that's the whole purpose of that. And I noted you said earlier that you were open to that community review board.
Yes.
Okay.
With the final authority on the disciplinary action remaining with the chief of police. I will listen all day long. I will receive your recommendations. And in fact, there was legislation that passed, I believe it was 2016, House Bill 1016, which grants jurisdictions the authority to allow civilians to actually sit on the administrative hearing board. I'm not opposed to that. I think it opens transparency. Now, there are protections with regard to, the officer's personnel record. I will be as transparent as I can be within the law, obviously, as we all will. But there are times where we cannot release some information because it is part of a personnel record.
Chief, one of our commissioners, Faye Gaskin, couldn't be here tonight. She had a work conflict and she requested that I ask you the following question. She wanted you to address racism and bias within the department, especially in light of the alleged involvement of at least one police officer in the insurrection back on January the 6th. And connected to that, what are your plans to determine if those feelings, beliefs are not manifested in officers' interactions with citizens and others during the performance of their duty and beyond?
So I have to say that all parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty. So I don't want to make any assumptions as to a person's innocence or guilt. You referred to a specific instance, and as the chief of police who ultimately is tasked with making a final decision on any disciplinary action, I'm not in a position, nor should I legally comment on any current investigation. In terms of, detecting racism or bias, we, as all police departments, have a very extensive background investigation process. We conduct neighborhood canvases. We talk to your neighbors. We talk to your family members. We try to get as much information about an applicant as we can. We talk to previous employers. Also, there's a polygraph examination. We look for tattoos. So it's not that we want to make sure we're getting employees who are committed to service, are committed to serving the community fairly and impartially. We do not want racists within our ranks. I don't know anyone on this in this forum right now, particularly on the command staff, who would disagree with me. So I think we do our due diligence to make sure that we're screening applicants before they have an opportunity to be selected and hired by our department. You heard me speak to the new conversations we're trying to facilitate with our officers about this very subject, and not to detect who may be a racist or who not, but for clarity and understanding of one another. Sometimes it just takes conversation over time to really let the guard down and get to know folks. You might change hearts and minds. You may not. A person may not come here as a racist. They may change over time. But I know that we do have a policy in place within our department prohibiting our officers to be associated with any organizations that subscribe to either the overthrow of government or any discriminatory treatment of any human being. So those are just some of the things we have in place here in Anne Arundel County.
Chief, Commissioner Doney, do you have another question? I think you do.
Yes, and thank you. There was a commitment by County Executive Pittman to completely ban chokeholds. And if I understand correctly, they're not completely banned yet. I know you've already talked about this. I'm raising this because it's a tension within the community, and that tension's directed towards County Executive Pittman, and it's going to become directed towards you as well. I don't know if you want to say more about that right now. With that, I will add the imagery of a police officer kneeling on the neck of someone during a traffic stop. I think that was last summer And I know that's being investigated, and I am not aware of the findings of that investigation being released yet. I think we're anticipating it. So I'm not meaning to say you're wrong. I do want to say there's a tension in the community around those issues. And do you want to address those at this point or say wait a little longer?
No, not wait a little longer. I mean, it's an active, still an active case. I cannot comment. Again, the final decision on any, if any disciplinary action arises, um, rests with the chief of police. It would be inappropriate um, and for me to comment, and I don't wish to compromise the integrity of the process. Um, Major Passman is tasked with um, developing policy um, based on best practices and again, CALIA standards, um, and also looking at the International Association of Chiefs of Police and the Police Executive Research Forum and the Maryland Police Training Standards Commission. I'm sorry to throw all those names out there, but
I'm glad you're right.
when we write policy, we don't just write policy. It has to be legally sufficient. It has to contain legal elements. So we're looking to not just best practices, but American policing research-based policies to implement. And again, Major Passman can speak to this. I can't speak for what happened before I arrived, but after reviewing our use of force policy, I think our policy is clear with banning of chokeholds. And I do believe the policy was updated in 2020, the later part. Is that correct, Major Passman? I have an affirmative nod.
Yes, we changed our policy this summer in cooperation with the county executive's office. So that was done July, August of last year, where we added that language. And I'll just mention something, Chief. So you'd mentioned earlier, our department has never taught any type of use of a chokehold or any type of neck restraint ever.
That's good to hear. Thank you, Major Passman.
Commissioner Peterson, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Chief, you talked about looking at folks in terms of what attitudes they may have if you recruit them or you get them on the force. And one of the things I think we're finding out from the insurrection on the Capitol is a lot of this stuff is on social media posts. So do you have the capability now, or would you need more personnel to do this, to actually have a good, thorough investigation of an individual's social media activity that might tell you more than a simple, not a simple, but a complex analysis of where they worked and talking to people who work with them and that kind of thing?
So as I understand it, and I may need some assistance from Major Simpson on the background investigation piece, because I do believe there is an examination of applicants' social media pages. Is that correct, Major Simpson? There is. So if we detect anything that would render an applicant, and in fact, I think we just recently had a discussion about this, that could or would render an applicant ineligible because of their social media posts, that does happen.
Yes, and we're
Meaning
also
that-
I'm sorry. Pete. Yes, we currently do look at the applicant's social media, and we're also in the process of acquiring a private company that can delve a little bit deeper than we can to look in people's social media posts. Because right now we really only see the public stuff, but there are companies that can get better information. So.
Thank you. That's very useful and comforting to know that step in the right direction.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Thank you, Major Simpson.
Commissioner Clapsaddle, you have a question? Still on mute. Nope, still on mute.
Okay.
There you go.
So coming back to my question about my concern about the Citizen Review Board. Chief, such a board should not just be a whitewash in terms of, it should not be a passive group. It should be a transparent interacting group. And how that works is something that would have to be developed, with the chief, because it would be important if we're going to have such a citizens review board for it to be transparent. And I'm not certain that you and I are in complete agreement on how this would work. But I just wanted to bring that up again.
So when you're expressing your concern for transparency, what specifically are you speaking?
It's a question of building this trust. And I'll give you an example. When I was on the Citizens Advisory Board in West Hollywood, there was payola, and it was protected, from certain businesses within the community. And it became a big scandal. And, I was a part of discovering that. So, and we had no rights. It's just a question of us learning how to work together.
So I think when you speak to transparency, are you speaking to information that would be provided to the CAB members?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe there are confidentiality agreements, and I'm not a subject matter expert on CRB, but I do believe that, and I'm just referencing another county in the state, that confidentiality agreements are in place so that members do not disclose or discuss information beyond the board, the authority that the board and the trust that with personnel records that the board does have. So I'm not really clear on the transparency piece or lack of transparency.
Well, as it currently is proposed in the Civilian Review Board, Citizen Review Board, the board members, they're pledged to complete confidentiality, and that's important. The question I really had for you, Chief, just as a kind of a wrap up for me, is what do you think the big challenges that you and Anne Arundel County face in terms of law enforcement? The biggest issue that you have? That's a big question, isn't it?
It is a big question. It is a big question. It's not a tall order. It's tough. It's tough. Being a police chief, being a police officer now, I think it's important. The biggest challenge is really keeping our officers motivated and inspired because they hear a lot of negative things about themselves and unjustifiably really hold us accountable for who we are. And we've been painted or depicted or cast with this broad brush. And some of the things we've heard have been really hurtful. It's almost as if we're not human and that we're less than to be spoken to the way we're spoken to and to be treated the way we're treated. It's disheartening at times. So it's challenging for all of this leadership team. I know I'm speaking for everyone on here to keep our officers inspired and motivated, particularly in this season of change, necessary change. But I think a lot of the hateful and vitriolic messaging a lot of officers hear is detrimental and is a deciding factor for a lot of officers as to whether or not they stay in the profession or they choose some other profession. And we're seeing that. And I do believe we're going to see a reduction in the number of police officers amongst all of our ranks. And I can speak on this most recently in Major Simpson, you can back this up. Um, Anne Arundel County's applicant pool has kind of decreased. And typically in academy class, you may see in excess of 30 people. Well, what we're seeing now is an academy class potentially for May that only has 18 applicants in the process. And that number is going to change because we still have to conduct background investigations and we may have to disqualify some folks. But we're seeing the shift in applicants, particularly applicants from communities of color. So I think that's our biggest challenge. I'm not, I care about our relationships as we all do. Although we're in this season, we still put our best foot forward and we still continue to provide professional service. We continue to desire to build our relationships, to develop trust, to repair the pain that our community members are experiencing. We're experiencing that pain too. We're human. And I think people kind of, not all people, but some people see us as the enemy, and we're not. We're your neighbors, we're your loved ones. Um, we got a bit of a challenge ahead of us.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hatcher, you have a question?
I do. I first want to say thank you for all the officers that are presenting that is here today. I know that it's been really difficult in the climate that we've been living in. And so I salute you all. And I'm thankful, sorry. And I'm thankful to even have this opportunity to even speak with you. And kind of to segue, Chief Walt, what you were speaking on. Oh my gosh, someone's calling me. How do, and please forgive me if I miss this conversation. How do you intend, or what's the envision, not just yours, but what's the envision with rebuilding that trust again with the community? I know one, with just having this conversation right now, this is very warming to me, because it does put you in a different light than what media or what people perspectives have put out there. So I just want to say, just ask the question, what is the intentions of rebuilding trust so that we can be reconnected with the law enforcement?
You heard me say it earlier, it begins with one person at a time. It's going to take time. The challenge has been connecting with people. It's hard to do over a virtual platform like this. I know for me, I'm speaking personally for me, and I was saying this to the deputy chief earlier, Deputy Chief Flemings. I look forward to the moments where I get to get out into the community. Those opportunities are limited right now. So just as folks are at home despondent and isolated and feeling alone, we get to go to work, but we're still isolated from community members. We're still not able to engage in the midst of this pandemic. So for now, our team is going to have to be resourceful with how we engage, virtually. And I asked Major Goodwin, sorry, Katie, to help me with that, even if it's something so simple as, coffee with our command staff or coffee with a cop. And we sit here, as corny as it may seem, and we're drinking coffee together, virtually. I mean, but we got to do something, because we're just, those little moments together that we take for granted, that we've taken for granted, are, they're not opportunities we have right now. So we have to be, and maybe we need to talk to some younger folks with some creative ideas in terms of virtual engagement, where you can really community members get to know their police officers.
Yes, I like that.
So, Chief, if I could talk about the Serious Incident Review Board. Given that the county doesn't have a civilian review board, it seems to me that the place where the general public can have um, the ability to participate in this process right now is through the Serious Incident Review Board. As I understand it, as part of that board, the chief of police selects one Anne Arundel County resident to sit on that board when it convenes. So my question to you is, it's a multi-pronged question. How is this resident selected? Why only one resident? And would you consider increasing that number to say 2 or 3 residents as opposed to just one?
Mr. Veloso, you're going to have to forgive me because I'm very new at this. I'm going to defer to some help in the room. I'm going to throw out a lifeline, but we spoke to this earlier a bit. And as I understand it, there are 2 now civilians on the Serious Incident Review Board. Is that correct? Either Deputy Chief Flemings or who's my subject matter expert on this?
And I know that I know we have a human relations officer sits on that board.
Okay.
But that they're part of county government. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Deputy Chief Flemings, can you?
Yes, ma'am. At this point, it is the human relations officer and a citizen, and I have to defer to Major Simpson as to how they are selected. I apologize.
You're unmuted, Major.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. The chief chooses the citizen, and we just recently started that process. And I believe Major Passman, he actually may be able to answer better how that person was chosen. I wasn't really involved in that process.
And if we can't get you an answer tonight, Mr. Veloso, I will get you the answer tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay.
No worries. No worries.
Yes. And again, forgive me. I'm the new kid. I'm 35 days in. No excuses. It is what it is.
No.
Major Passman, do you have any input?
I'm sorry, I don't. We have not had a serious review board yet with that additional civilian on it. I know that Deputy Chief Lowry had instituted that, so I can't answer that either.
Okay, so we'll get you the response by tomorrow, Mr. Veloso.
Okay, I know something that the community might find some comfort in is if there was more than just one. Sure, the human relations officer is a civilian, but you know, if there was I'm just kind of talking out loud. A group of 3 people might be perceived as giving greater transparency and more community input. Just throwing that out there.
Thank you for that.
Since I'm going to ask you another question, since I don't see anybody else with another hand up. If I recall correctly, and I know you might need some help with this one, I know that in 2018, the police department instituted training on micro inequities and aggression. And I just wanted to ask if the department is still doing that. Is that something that happens every year, and do all officers undergo that training?
So to answer that, I'll try. I know that the department, this department specifically, was the department to bring fair and impartial policing to Anne Arundel County, and we did serve as a regional trainer for other police departments. And I do know that implicit bias is a part of that training. And yes, I do believe we train annually on implicit bias. You did hear me refer earlier to partnering with the University of Maryland, Dr. Chris Marsh. That's also part of her specialty. And I'd really like to bring someone from academia, specifically her, into our training environment to help bring another perspective on that type of training.
Thank you. Another question that I have is, how do you handle transfers from other police departments? What measures are in place to keep out officers with disciplinary or other issues regarding police misconduct? Is there something specific in place?
So each applicant, again, there is a thorough background investigation on each applicant. I wouldn't rule out an officer who has a disciplinary action um, or a disciplinary record per se. It would depend on the level of discipline. Um, if it's, but we certainly, do not hire police officers who've been terminated from their employment as a police officer, whether it would be in the state of Maryland or outside of the state of Maryland. Um, yeah, we care about the service we provide to the community, and to hire someone who's already been fired from a police department. I don't think that bodes well for the agency, the trust we're trying to establish with the community or the community. I think you all expect and deserve better.
The reason I'm asking is in 2018, the Greensboro, Maryland Police Department, the police chief out on the Eastern Shore was charged with falsifying records to hire a police chief that had been forced to resign in Delaware.
Yeah.
So that's why I was asking if you had something in place to specifically address that.
So the Maryland Police Training Standards Commission is fully aware when an officer is separated from a police department, whether it's been through termination or whether that employee resigns and there's an open investigation on that employee that could have led to his or her termination. So we will receive that information once we submit our request to the Maryland Police Training Commission, and that's a state requirement. I can't speak to what happened in Greensboro because I'm not fully, I'm familiar with the case, but I don't have all the facts and details. But police chiefs throughout the state, we meet, we speak about these situations, and none of us condone it. Officers, if you will. There was a video that was put out a while ago about teachers, and it was called The Dance of the Lemons. And I brought that up in one of our conversations, said that should not be taking place within our profession. If one agency fires an officer, we all need to know about it. There's no rehiring that individual. He or she should not don a badge again if the department saw fit to separate that person. So again, our go-to is the Maryland Police Training Commission. They provide us, yes, this person either retired or resigned or is leaving in good standing, or they're not.
Thank you, Chief. Commissioner Peterson, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Chief, recruitment, I think, is probably near and dear to everybody's heart. And one of the things that everyone would like to see is a more diverse and inclusive police department. In thinking about that, I'm thinking back to my time on the school board when I know that both Annapolis school students and Meade Senior High School students benefited from active ROTC programs at the school. Would there be a possibility of creating cadet programs at Annapolis, at Meade Senior High School, to recruit police officers or potential police officers? And what other ideas do you have?
So we do have a cadet program here within our police department. We do have young people from the community who apply to be police cadets. We could probably do a better job, and I'm not here to criticize because I've only been here 35 days, but we could probably do, and from what I understand, we do a very good job at recruiting from HBCUs and other venues where minority populations exist. I just spoke with our Hispanic liaison officer, and we talked about recruiting, of individuals from the Hispanic and Latinx communities, and how we can improve our recruitment strategy. So that's definitely a conversation that we need to have amongst our command staff. But I know that the department has made an improvement on minority recruitment. I think we're at 15%, and I do believe, and we all believe that, you know, our department should be reflective of the community we serve. When I say 15%, I'm speaking specifically to African Americans. Um, and I think, you know, we could move the needle little higher, um, but with all of our minority applicants.
Chief, following up on that, I take it then that there is a plan in place, and do you have target goals in terms of percentages of African Americans, percentage of Latinos that you're going to try to hire in the department?
So again, yes,
Okay.
we all believe in, you know, recruiting uh, and hiring officers who are reflective of the community. Um, so from what I understand, we do the actual recruitment, but there's still a process, a hiring and selection process, and not all of that is entirely in our hands. So we don't have absolute control of who we hire. Um, you know, greater autonomy in that decision making would be great, but that's not the current um, law within Anne Arundel County. We don't make those final decisions. Those decisions are made from the Office of Personnel. Now, I'm sure that they realize that there is the need and desire to hire officers reflective of the community, um, and probably more conversation and dialogue with them just to provide for them, you know, the importance for all of us.
I hate to keep talking about this, but I just want to mention Corporal Cruz Miranda is phenomenal. He's great. And I also think we had a meeting where we had the crisis intervention team folks came out and they talked to us. Phenomenal program. I just want to encourage and urge, given the growth of the Latino population in Arundel County over the course of the last 10 years, that you hire more Latino officers and more bilingual officers, especially with the crisis intervention team. But I think you probably already know that, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, yes, I just met with Corporal Cruz Miranda. It was either Monday or Tuesday. He was feeling me out, but once, you know, we got to talking, I think he was a lot more comfortable talking to me. I come from, again, Prince George's County. I began my career as a Prince George's County police officer. I was assigned to District 1 Hyattsville. That's a very diverse community. And then, you know, returning to Hyattsville, the city of Hyattsville as the chief of police, you know, our demographic breakdown there was 33% respectively between Latinos, Hispanics, African Americans, and Caucasian folks. So, but even there, it's challenging recruiting, especially now, because of the trust factor. So I think we need to work on rebuilding trust, fortifying that trust so that folks aren't apprehensive about, one, calling the police from the Hispanic and the Latinx communities, but two, joining our ranks. But again, even in the African American community, I'm aware that some family members discourage their loved ones from joining the police department. So we have our challenges with breaking down those barriers.
Speaking of trust, does the department have a policy protecting whistleblowers from within the department, specifically officers that are trying to do the right thing, see some misconduct? Do they have some protections, and what can we do to make sure that, you know, the department is doing everything in its power to encourage people to do the right thing?
So you heard me speak to the new training on duty to intervene. There is a new policy, and specifically in that policy addresses encouraging our officers to intervene in protecting them from any retaliatory acts. Major Passman, specifically, do we have a whistleblower clause in any of our policies? And I'm sure it's in some anti-discriminatory policy. I've not reviewed that one.
Yeah, we've described it. I'm not sure if the term whistleblower is used, but we've described that officers will be protected for intervening and notifying and reporting.
But even in situations where, an employee may allege sexual harassment, those protections are there, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Thank you. Chief, I have a question which probably belongs going to Major Goodwin. Major Goodwin, I'm sorry I couldn't make the meeting with the group of commissioners the other night, but I had a question regarding the procedures, the hate bias incident procedures that the police has in place. Part of those procedures, there at section 5F of the procedures, it indicates that under certain situations, the police department will try to mobilize community sentiment against the act at the request of the affected district commander. So my question to you is, does that happen with any regularity? I'm not. I've only gotten involved in a handful of these incidents, but I'm not sure I recall the police ever doing that, trying to mobilize community sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a case by case incident. I can recall 2 or 3 incidents where we did, and a lot of times this is going to stem from community, the neighbor disputes and that kind of thing, where we bring the neighbors together. That's where we've really been tapping in with our conflict resolution center with mediation. They've been great. We've used them a couple times now where we've partnered with them. An incident specific was a Muslim family and a Caucasian family. We had Colonel Rudwan actually come in with us along with the police department, along with mediation and the 2 sides of the family, and had roundtable discussions. We feel like we get more of an impact on that, making it more interpersonal, not so much community. Now, if it's one thing that affects an entire community, then yeah, absolutely. And we've used crisis intervention before to come in that to talk about people's feelings and how they're dealing with it and the impact and the trauma with it. But when it's more of a 2 people involved, and usually it's going to be a neighbor dispute type of thing, we keep it more of an interpersonal level where we make them feel like it's in a safe environment where they can have those healthy conversations and dialogues, and we use mediation to facilitate those types of conversations with partners.
And the reason I'm asking, Chief, and this will lead into the next question, I'd be curious to know if you have any ideas in terms of what the county can do to help reduce the number of hate and bias incidents in the county. There's way too many of them. And when something is designated a hate crime because there's either an assault or there's property damage, I feel that the victim of that crime has some recourse, some support services through the state's attorney's office. But in a situation where it doesn't rise to the level of a crime and it's just a bias incident, what I'd love to see is the county, and I don't know to what degree the police can help, provide support to that individual that's been courageous enough to step forward to report the incident, even though it doesn't rise to the level of a crime. Do you have any thoughts on how we could support the victims of bias incidents, and also what we could do in general? Do you have any ideas in terms of what we can do or how we can work with you to help reduce the number of hate crimes and bias incidents?
In terms of reduction, and I apologize, Major Goodwin, you spoke to this earlier about the integrity of our process and our documenting of every incident, even if it does not rise. You see that our numbers are higher because our officers are reporting incidents, even if it doesn't necessarily meet the requirements of a hate bias incident. Is that correct, Major Goodwin?
Yes, ma'am, it is. We really, because I've spoken to this group before, the majority of our reports don't even involve a crime. It's the unfortunate derogatory language that's used. It's very hurtful. And what we do is we take it so seriously that it's almost like we handle those incidents as if it was a crime that would occur. We go out of our way to identify who that suspect was that used the derogatory language. We try to identify them. We go out there, we speak to them, and we try to turn it into an educational piece. We know we can't do anything. We can't put cuffs on the person. We can't arrest them. But what we do try to do is do that educational piece. There's been so many incidents where we've had those sit-down talks and try to explain. And we do it really well with juveniles, because juveniles sometimes are forced to listen to us. And we can do restorative justice practices with them to try to educate them. A lot of times they say things they don't understand what they're saying, how it really hurts the core to that person, because they use a word not knowing what the history of that word is and how hurtful it is. So if we can take that opportunity, even if it's an hour spending time with that family, and explain to them where that word was derived from, why it's so hurtful, and really make it more of a human element, it's more impactful and it gets them thinking like, you know what, next time I'm not going to use that word. Think your words matter, and I've told this group before 1,000 times, the worst thing we ever taught kids was sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Worst thing we ever did. It's no different than domestic violence victims. When you talk to them, they'll say they'd rather be hit than the emotional abuse that they take, because that lasts forever. And it's no different with word choices that we use. Sometimes it's harder teaching that to adults because unfortunately they're adults and it's harder to change their behavior. So we really try to impact that with the youths and the juveniles, but we do take the time with adults. We try to do our part and explain to them that what they are doing is hurtful and they're part of this community and we want everyone to feel safe and have that quality of life. So I'm very proud of what we do. We take it that extra step. We'll take it that extra step where we'll call Miss Georgia Noon and get her to mediate and facilitate those conversations. They're hard conversations to have, but when you have that right facilitator there involved and you get people talking and explaining emotions and feelings, it's very impactful. And I think people think twice before they use that word. When they look at somebody in the eyes and they see the hurt and they're crying because of a word that was used, I would hope that people would think twice before using that word again. So we go out of our way to try to correct that behavior.
We thank you, Major Goodwin. I think you and the department are doing a phenomenal job. There's just it's a big battle fighting for the hearts and minds of the people of Anne Arundel County, and that's what it's about. So.
Yeah, and it sounds like you have the conflict resolution piece in place to help mediate those incidents on a county level beyond the police department. I mean, it sounds like that that's a plausible. It makes sense to have a program like that in place.
Absolutely. And I think just to talk about the reporting, I know we're always high, and I've always said it's that integrity award because we report what actually happens. People have to understand too that those statistics help us focus on those communities and those geographical areas in our county. We're never going to know where we need to fix our problem unless we report correctly. And that's so important. And other agencies are so scared to report because they don't want to be deemed as this racist county. Yeah, nobody wants that stigma, but we can't correct it unless we correctly report it and we know where to put those resources and where we know to have those dialogues. Otherwise, the problem's never going to get resolved. It just gets swept under the carpet and nothing gets done about it. And that's not the approach we want. We want to know where those incidents are happening so we can take those corrective actions and do what we can as a police department to change that behavior. Nobody wants to be that racist county. I know I don't want to. My kids live here. My family is here. I don't want to be painted that way. So I take it personally. And I know you guys have all heard from me before. I'm very passionate about this. So whatever we can do on our side to try to correct that behavior and that perception, we'll do whatever it takes.
Hence, our desire and my proposal to increase the number of officers we have dedicated, not just to the crisis intervention team, but for the following year, I'll be asking for more officers for community engagement, community policing, to facilitate these conversations, provide follow-up after these incidents, and to liaison with your office to see what we can do to help bring these conversations to the community.
Thank you. Commissioner Peterson, you have a question.
Yes. Major Goodwin, we had discussed this during that discussion of the hate bias issue, and the chief has a great idea about this community involvement group. But I think one of the first positions that should go in that is a position that you had in the budget last time that didn't get funded. Is that not correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And that would keep you from being a combination of a one-armed paper hanger and John the Baptist.
You know what, sir? I appreciate you. You've always been such a huge supporter and advocate for us. And I've told you since day one, whether we're able to ever get that one officer, it doesn't mean that we're going to stop trying and that we're not going to stop doing what we have to do. Many of us in our department multitask. We have a lot of roles to fulfill, and we just make sure we get the job done. And this, fortunately for me, is one of my hot topics, the thing that I take to heart and something that I work really hard on. I know I've got many other responsibilities like everyone else in our command staff, but I can assure you and promise you that I'm never going to stop trying to do our part and what we can do to help this.
I know, but I want you to get that one officer. I'll leave it at that.
I appreciate that.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions? All right, Chief, I think that's all we have for now. We're very grateful for you coming to speak to us and bringing your command staff. I know sometimes we have our differences, but I think ultimately we're all after the same goal. The willingness to work with us, and I hope we can do this again in the future. I know we will stay in touch and try to do what we can and make the county a better place to live for everybody.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Thank you for having us. Again, I'm really excited to be here, and I'm just so very grateful for the command staff that I have around me. These are very passionate, very smart. I don't claim to be the smartest person in the room, but I enjoy our dialogue. We look at things as they arise critically, and together we come up with what we believe the best course of action would be to deal with it. So I got to publicly thank them, for the work that they've been doing, and I know the work that we will all do together. So thank you for having us. Sorry I missed the first meeting, but this was a really good meeting, so I appreciate the dialogue.
Well, thank you very much again. With that, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Come on, Eugene.
Second.
Second.
There we go.
And thank
Lakeisha.
all of you for giving up 2
Thank
hours of your evening, by the way.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for working with us. And look forward to continuing to work with you all in the future. It's 7:36 p.m. We'll go ahead and adjourn our meeting. Thank you very much. Everybody have a good night. Stay safe.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everyone.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Night.